So we should continue now with a very relevant part of a Smart Chain project, the policy recommendations. So please, Silvana, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you very well. Thank you very much. Thank you for waiting until this time. We have learned until now a lot of aspects related to the what has been done in the projects, and what I will be doing now is trying to go a step further and related to what we could do from now on. Could you confirm that you see the full screen?
Yes.
Of my presentation?
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you very much. Okay, so my presentation is related to the policy recommendations, and this is of course not a work that has been done only by University of Torino, but this has been done by many partners that we will see now. So let me give you a brief summary of what we will be talking about now, an introduction, some policy recommendation, and some conclusions. As an introduction, as we can derive from the Smart Chain proposal, but it's something that is already out there, obviously, is that the EU's Rural Development Regulations, the 1305/2013, defines a short supply chain as a supply chain involving a limited number of economic operators committed to cooperation, local economic development, and close geographical and social relations between food producers, processors, and consumers. Obviously, all this morning we learned and heard many times these terms in different facets, and we will be coming back to these words, limited and close, because these are crucial words. And in addition, I would like to mention that there are some the two referring regulations, again the 1305/2013 and the regulation 807/2014, that the support for the establishment and chain is as referred to in Article 35 of the regulation. 1305 shall cover only supply chains, and this is the key, involving no more than one intermediary between farmer and consumers. These are words that we need to keep in mind going on in my presentations. So as I was mentioning, in the SMARTCHAIN project, one of the objectives, and it is highlighted in these slides, is the policy recommendations based on existing policies and regulatory requirements influencing sustainable food production and consumption, specifically related to the results of the SMARTCHAIN projects. This is exactly what we have been doing in the last 3 years. As you can see here, as planned in the project, the partners that were involved in the task that was identification, legal and policy recommendations, and strategies to overcome regulatory barriers. However, throughout the project, we made it a bit larger because we decided that we needed extra extra information. So along with all the partners that went for the planets, since from the beginning.
Die heeft niet zoveel werk. Ik weet wel.
Ad overgraag, ja.
En ik probeer overal de neus tussen.
Marieke, sorry, can you switch off your microphone?
Ja.
Sorry, I'm sorry, I got distracted. Forgive me. Okay, along the partners of the task planned at the beginning of the project, we expanded to other partners that are in the SMARTCHAIN project, obviously, and we are mainly involved in dissecting the issues, preparing some focus groups related to other results coming from other work packages. And then we also did the step further, that was interacting with other projects. And this morning, Natalia already mentioned other projects, and these are exactly some of the projects that we involved, strength to food and rubismo. So the outline of how we worked was in order to drive some policy policy recommendations was to get the outputs from work package 1, the policy analysis, the outputs of work package 2, and the output of work package 5, which is the assessment. And then we have a dedicated workshops. As I was mentioning, we did several workshops on specific topic. So first of all, what we did was to identify the barriers that within the regulatory framework and the SMARTCHAIN project that can limit the development of the establishment of the short food supply chains in order to eventually come up with some policy recommendations. So we started, as I already mentioned, with the legal definition, that is the Regulation 1305 and 807. And then we took into account, obviously, in work package 2, that was very well emphasized, the food hygiene requirements, so the food hygiene package that we all know very well. But we also put together the information derived from the work package 1 and 2, that was, in short, we'll go into the details later in the slides, the cooperation issue. That is a big barrier in the case of short food supply chains. In the case of work package 5, the main key was the environmental impact. Jens and Laura already mentioned very well the consumer transfers, that is the last mile delivery. And also from the work package 1 and 2 and all the workshops that we organized in the work package 7 and 7.4 was the kind of limiting knowledge, awareness of information that is available out there due to the amount of work that the actor in the short food supply chains have to deal with on a daily basis. And what we also did was kind of thinking of what the key concept that came out of all our work. Well, our key concepts were basically divided in 2 categories: various problems that need to be resolved, such as the intermediary definitions issue, the need to improve the principle of flexibility application for the food safety requirements, the distance, which is a central point of several definitions, but is often an overrated concept, the necessity of a more tailored training for the actors involved in the short food supply chains, the negative environmental impact of the last mile delivery. And we also noticed among the key concepts, the solutions, the innovations, the opportunities, some such as innovative systems, like the opportunities related to the e-commerce. Do not forget that we also analyzed the impact of the coronavirus, and we tried to understand what was the meaning affecting the short food supply chains in particular, related to the impact of the pandemic and the commerce, and thus the e-commerce effect that occurred in the last years. And so the other solution, innovation, opportunities, the cooperation. Eugenia mentioned many times the issue this morning, and the cooperation can be a useful approach to face the typical bottlenecks, specifically due to the small size, the concentration of supply. That is the other factor that to answer to the last minute delivery issue. So this is exactly the general concept that occurs. So then at the end of the story, we came up with the 6 policy recommendations. And I will try to outline as simple and as fast as I can. This is a repetition of the definition, just to keep in mind exactly the keywords from which we are starting. First recommendation is created a punctual specific definition of the short food supply chain. Javier already mentioned this morning the working new definition created during SMARTCHAIN. What we think is that these short food supply chains need to be recognized at European and national level to the creation of a new definition. That's easy to say. How can we do that? And what should we take into account in doing this? What is really the issue? Well, we have identified 2 key points of this policy. Why we are talking about 0 miles? Why we are not talking about the time instead of distance? Because it's the short time between production and consumer that it gives quality to the food. And so more than the distance is the time between producer and consumer. So change the paradigm between from short distance to short time, for saving quality and organized the delivery and affecting also the short food supply chains. And the second point that should be emphasized in the definition is the intermediaries' role, the role of the intermediaries that should be according to their indispensability and not to their number. The justification of this is exactly the legal definition within the EU, the Rural Development Regulation only, and from the Work Package 1 that the actors do not feel to be part of specific recognized players. We need to highlight them much more the fact that they are specifically. So the EU Rural Development Regulations define a short food supply chain, but in addition to this, which is the legal definition, various definitions of short food supply chains exist. The short supply chain is often used as an umbrella concept, and the different definitions are formulated in the light of different criteria, such as the number of intermediaries, the physical distance, the social relations, the knowledge exchange, locality, government involvement. The main problem is that these short food supply chains are affected by ad hoc national policies. It implies that there is not an harmonization at European level. The member states are left with an amount of authority for interpreting the definitions. We find such huge differences among the states, since the legal definition of small farmer or local farmers is not so precise. So we need a legal definition tailor-made for the short food supply chains that also implies that the short food supply chains at the moment are not recognized as a legal category per se, which means that in many cases the regulatory frameworks, when refers to the short food supply chains, actually refers to small or medium enterprises. Even this morning we heard many times the word of small enterprises, and so kind of parallel to short food supply chains, such as a short food supply chain is a small enterprise by definition. Is this given for granted? Short food supply chains do not always correspond to the legal definition provided by the EU legislation for small and medium enterprises. From the Work Package 1, we have the right that they are not being recognized nor acknowledged in national policy frameworks. The local farmers feel that, and the producer, they are not sufficiently protected. It is difficult to define local because the definition is misunderstood. This last point is a recurring issue also for other topics. For other aspects of food safety, it's not clear when a small farmer is small or when production is small quantity, and so it may be difficult to understand if the principle of the flexibility that we all know well is applied. So moving from the definition, better articulation of the role of definition of the intermediaries. The other key point is intermediaries to ensure the sustainable and transparent food chains. So in the short food supply chains, the main role is by the farmer. They are the producer, they are the seller, they are the key aspects of the short food supply chains. They can contribute to minimize the number of intermediaries as well as the geographical and social distance. So we have definition of number of intermediaries, which is 1. So the emphasis, should it really be the number of intermediaries? What is their specific role? So we think that the emphasis should be not in the numbers of the intermediaries, but in their roles. Try to understand, do we need them or do we not need them in order to have the food processed and reach the final consumers according to the old regulations. And second, that means that we need to update the intermediary definition existing regulatory framework. So what is the justification for all this? Well, we derive that from the work package 1, each country can provide its own interpretation of the intermediary roles. And from work package 7, for several focus groups that we handle, several discussions from other work packages, and we thought that the interpretation of the role of intermediaries may have strong effects along the chain. Who is an intermediary for the short food supply chains? It is difficult to apply only a single definition, particularly due to the different legal background. It could be useful if the definition could be more flexible, so the member state could tailor the definition according to their own law and situations. So what is clear is that we need to define the role in the chain, their role in the chain. For instance, just a couple of examples. So slaughterhouses are necessary, otherwise when you raise a cattle and you need to sell the meat, you need that slaughterhouse. So that's an intermediary that is fundamental, is mandatory, is compulsory, it is necessary. So that is not really an intermediary that is simply adding to the chain, is a necessary player of the chain. Or for some processing facilities, some processors that are needed and are not available, are not possible in a small farm. So that's an intermediary that can be necessary. Maybe you need 2 of them. So it's not a matter of number, but it's a matter of the roles that the role that they play. So this is why it's very crucial, this aspect to be taken into account. Well, the third policy recommendation is related to the cooperation, the aggregation. These are the 2 key words: cooperation and aggregation among small producers to extend opportunities and overcome bottlenecks and obstacles. We heard very well from Eugenia the issue from a different angle. Cooperation among the small producers should be encouraged to make short food supply chain actors more efficient. And the key points of this policy recommendation is creating the innovation hubs where farmers can share facilities to process their products in which they can build the network. And otherwise it's not effective economically, and can be shared, facilities can be shared, and innovation can be created. Also, supporting the creation of a register of the short food supply chains. We come back to the issue that are not identified, are not recognized as a category, the short food supply chain. So how about create a register to help the network creations among the different actors? Well, the justifications of these 2 key points are quite clear, and from the work package 1, and for other aspects from the project, from all the analysis, the small business have high cost, sharing equipment, mortgage, all these costs are high for small businesses. We know, and we know this very well. From work package 2, we are very clear the limited volume, the limited infrastructures or technical resources, the financial resources for investment to improve technical capability. The lack of cooperation, limited networking is indicated as the most serious bottlenecks of short food supply chains that has been clearly highlighted in the project. And the cooperative of producers present several strengths, and we should take into account absolutely this aspect in considering this cooperation for enhancing the efficacy of the small food supply chains. The 4th policy recommendation is related to the environmental impact. For ensuring the sustainability of the short food supply chains, it is necessary to minimize the environmental footprint, to coordinated logistics and an efficient food distribution. How well we heard this morning, Jens and Laura mentioned this. This is definitely an aspect. So the key points of the policy would be developing a solid social and physical infrastructure, such as the food hubs, to reduce the distance between producer and consumer, to promote aggregation and local economy, and apply the food hub concept to digital solutions, creating the digital food hubs, going even further in these aspects. And the justification of this is very clear from the project, from Work Package 5, from Work Package 7, from other projects. It was clear that the short food supply chains are associated with higher food miles and consequent larger carbon footprints. The consumers travel more kilometers to buy small quantities of foods. If you combine the distance that you have to reach the food and the small quantity that each farmer can give you, that it comes with the higher food miles. So despite the common public belief, the environmental impact has been revealed not to be so advantageous, especially because the consumer transport, the last mile delivery issue. And that means that not too much for the packaging, because they are reusing well the packaging, but the issues of the last mile delivery is really crucial. And so then adding to that, we can justify, because we have other information from the other Work Package and other projects, is that the internet selling and local food hubs perform best from an environmental perspective, because we can really reduce the last mile delivery by organizing through the internet selling, and to the food hubs. Definitely this would be a way to reduce these impacts. Number the 2.5, the fifth, previous to the last one, is achieving compliance to the legal requirement on food and hygiene, food safety. Support the application of the flexibility and the implementation of the food hygiene requirement in the short food supply chains. We all know that the issues of the EU food hygiene package is just recalling these slides. There's several regulations, the 852, the 853 of 2004, and then the 625 to 2017, and the for the all this aspect to be tackled in the food hygiene. We cannot rely on the food hygiene and food safety issue. How can we overcome these issues? Well, by enhancing the application on the principle of flexibilities among the short food supply chains, and because that is available and not is hardly put it into practice. In fact, the second key point is supporting the training of the short food supply operator, the short food chain in total, the small scale members and local food controller officers in the application of the flexibility principle, not only the grower, not only the producers, but also the control officer, because the flexibility principle should be more widely applied. It is available. So what the justification for this recommendation is related again from the results that we got from the Work Packages 1 and 2 and from the focus groups handling Work Package 7, that small producers have difficulties in achieve compliance to the EU food hygiene requirements described in the regulations. But we need to understand that the food control officers are not always aware of the flexibility principles. Thus, combining these two aspects, we can really enhance, because we can use the food control officer prepared to apply the flexibility principle more widely at the short food supply chain. And so to come to the 2.6 is the lack of knowledge of short food supply chains by gathering ad hoc education and training. Lastly, whatever we want to implement, we need to understand what is known and what is not known, what is making the actors aware of what is available or what is not available yet, or what we can improve. So we are suggesting the implementation of ad hoc training material and short food supply chains focused knowledge transfer could improve the short food supply chains efficiency. The key points is promoting tailored training for short food chains trainers. We need to have the trainers well trained to spread the information among the small producers. That is also creating specific training materials for the short food supply chain. why we are coming to these conclusions with the justification, because the short food supply chain sector encounter obstacles in finding clear and punctual information and implementing the knowledge they acquired. So increasing the knowledge of the farmers and small food processors about topics like food safety, traceability, innovation is pivotal. The existing training initiatives are often not tailored for the short food supply chains, and the information that they provide are not so useful to overcome these issues, not forgetting the peculiarity of the short food supply chain sector. The European Commission, the member states, shall promote a tailored training of the trainers for short food chains. Considering that this need is also present in the Horizon Bureau call, develop an EU advising network on consumer producer chains, and that is the call Horizon CL6 2021 Governance 0125. Trainers must be informed and should receive specific training in order to provide a more tailored knowledge, and we welcome this call that is just coming out. Practical example of implementation of both legal requirements and innovation should be provided by the trainers. Seeing this fact emerged clearly from the project. Stakeholders often have easy access to information, but they find difficult to implement it and need to be transferred to the final user, that is the producer. Online platforms are also a valuable solution to collect all the relevant information, policy regarding short food supply chains, guidelines, opportunities for getting funds, bureaucracy explanations that could be useful for the small farmers. From the questionnaire executed in the work package 1, the case studies reported the difficulty for finding the information legislations, which one should be implemented. So having a single platform in which the short food supply chain sector can find all specific policy information related to the short food supply chains would be really helpful. Even implementing the innovation platform of SMARTCHAIN, that will last for a long time, could help, because it is already an established structure and we should keep it probably forever. Within the SMARTCHAIN project, the lack of knowledge has been indicated as a severe issue, as in particular confirmed in the deliverable 1.6. The lack of knowledge regards different topics like labeling, nutrition claims, which need specific expertise to be implemented. For other topics like waste management, recycling, food wasting, traceability, authenticity, food transparencies, short food supply chain sectors complain about the difficulties in getting punctual information. Also in work package 2, we have identified bottlenecks, the lack of knowledge and experience with obstacles in implementing innovations. According to the case studies that we have in the projects and the focus groups we have organized throughout the work package 7, the short food supply chains do not seem to have dedicated specific education and training programs tailored for them. Training material is often designed for the food industry sectors, but in the case of the short food supply chains, the needs are different since their small size. The SMARTCHAIN e-learning course is a good example that we manage in the project about what the short food supply actors interests are and on which type of training is required, and I compliment the group that prepared the e-learning course. The rural development program as a priority, fostering knowledge transfer and innovation in agriculture. The CAP post-2020 promote by the key objectives increasing competitiveness is crucial. So the efficient advisory systems and continuous training for farm managers will be really a key point to help the short food supply chains. And the fundamental role of knowledge is recognized since it can provide economic resilience and must be promoted. So I come to the conclusions in summary of the policies that we have draw as a potential recommendation is that the creation of a punctual specific definition of short food supply chain, better articulation of the role and definition of the intermediaries to ensure the sustainable and transparent food chains, the supporting the cooperation, the aggregation among small producers to extend opportunities and overcome bottlenecks and obstacles, reducing the environmental impacts of short food supply chains by the concentration of the supply, achieving compliance to the legal requirements of food hygiene and food safety to the feasibility principle, and overcome the lack of knowledge of short food supply chains by gathering ad hoc education and training. And with this, I end my presentation. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Silvana, for your excellent presentation. Very important and relevant findings. Great job. I also want to thank the other people involved in these very important activities within the Smart Chain project. You know, concerning the chat, there are now open questions until now. And but I want to ask Natalia and Ivana if they have some questions. Maybe I can also mention that we already discussed during, you know, this policy recommendation meetings and discussions that, you know, the Smart Chain is not at the official end at the moment. We still have some more time to finalize things. And we already thought about organizing a workshop with people from the Commission by end of September to, you know, to present the final results and also to discuss, you know, the policy recommendations and the roadmap of Smart Chain. What do you think about it?
You're not asking to me, right? Because we all agree.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're asking to me, I perfectly agree. I think that we should have enough time to discuss and interact. This was just a brief summary of the work done in the past 2 years, but definitely I think that dedicated workshops, and I can tell you that already other partners in the project gave their availability, and I think that we really probably will need a couple of hours to by the end of August we will have much more details in the final deliverable, sorry, but definitely I think that a dedicated workshop on this is crucial because we need to move on. We got so many good inputs from the good output from the project that became a perfect input list for the policy recommendation. We definitely should go forward and have all the time to discuss this.
Yeah, so thank you, Silvana. So we will meet internally, and also we will contact people from the European Commission and then organize a specific workshop on this topic. Okay, thanks, Silvana. Yeah, and thank you for speeding up a little bit.
Well, I did my best, you know, because it's not your own language, you do your best. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, Ivana, do you have a question or comment?
Not specifically. I've very much enjoyed the presentations. All of them were very interesting and focused on the key aspects of the project implementation and results. Concerning the idea to have a dedicated event on policy recommendations and key results, as you know, we organize in the framework of the project review a policy session dedicated to those specific aspects. But maybe it is worth, we will see also what Natalia thinks. It is worth to have a separated meeting to discuss it even more thoroughly, and this would make the final review a bit lighter. But the conclusions and the outcome of this ad hoc meeting would definitely also be an input for the external reviewers to have more in-depth assessment of the policy conclusions and recommendations. So keep us posted. We can definitely support and see with Natalia how and when before the final review.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are coming now to the last presentation about impact and roadmap. Louise, please, the
Yes.
floor is yours.
Thank you. I will share my screen. Can you give me the permission?
Have it 1 second.
Yes, I can, I think.
You have it already, Luis.
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. Great.
Okay. So hello again, everybody. My name is Luis Meoden from Inio Gestiona Ambiental in Spain. During this 15-minute presentation, I would like to give you an overview of the long-term impact roadmap we have been elaborating within task 9.4 of innovation management and impact assessment. Please take into account that this is still a work in progress. The final version will be ready by the end of August. So I invite you to have a look at the final document for further detail. A brief summary of our methodology. The roadmap is part of task 9.4 and of our final report on project impact assessment. In this task, we have used a complementary methodological toolset composed of questionnaires. So, for example, we received 256 responses to our questionnaire about positive and negative driving forces of short food supply chains, and the feedback of 212 external stakeholders about project impact, but also focus groups. We hold one in Switzerland and one in the Netherlands about driving forces, and the 7 focus groups about policy recommendations organized by the University of Torino. We led in-depth interviews with experts, both from inside and outside of the project, more than 15 people, and literature review. I wanted to start this presentation commenting some facts that we consider are key in the context of this project and roadmap. First, the very high concentration of food processing, distribution, and retailing that characterizes the agri-food sector. The concentration ratio at retail stage, for example, is reaching 80% in some member states. And in food processing, the top 3 processing firms have a market share about 50% in several subsectors. So this has a consequence limited capacity to bargain and make choices for producers as well as for consumers. It's quite commonly acknowledged that the current agri-food system is unsustainable from an environmental as well as socioeconomic point of view. And in this context, there is a need of producers for more economic and social recognition and empowerment, and consumers are increasingly concerned about ethical, social, health, and environmental issues. It's also important to highlight that already more than 15% of EU farms sell more than half of production directly, and that these farms are mainly small and organic ones. But they represent only 2% of the fresh food market at the EU level. Finally, there are huge disparities and diversity between EU countries regarding short food supply chains in terms of cultural background, economic importance, practices, regulations, and so on. Given this, short food supply chains appear as a key driver in the transition towards a more sustainable agri-food system. However, there are still a lot of factors hindering their development, and their benefits for individuals, society, and environment actually only occur under certain conditions. So our aim with the roadmap is to look for the most relevant solutions to tackle these barriers and to identify and promote the conditions under which short food supply chains actually act as a lever for change. The roadmap is structured as follows. Based on project outputs, the main problems and needs of short food supply chains are identified, and for each one of them, some recommendations were elaborated. Recommendations for practitioners as well as for policymakers, which were presented by Silvana. The objective of the roadmap is to make them as concrete and ready for use as possible, putting these recommendations into perspective with current key regulations, policies, and strategies at EU level, and identifying the most relevant policy instrument in each case. We also look at some best practices to get inspiration from some more or less singular initiatives at national and regional level. So in order to get a better overview of the main driving forces of short food supply chains, we elaborated an overall SWOT analysis. So I can say that the main strengths are related to the already existing critical mass of determined actors and to the huge power that have the proximate social relationships created and cultivated in short food supply chains between the different actors of the value chain. Their main weaknesses are linked to the fragmentation of the sector, the lack of coordination, cooperation, and political union that would be necessary to boost their development, optimize their logistics, and so on. In terms of opportunities, we believe that short food supply chains are actually in a political and strategical momentum, and they have already taken some big steps forward during the COVID crisis, showing that they are an important piece in the puzzle of the sustainability transition. Still, yes, the regulatory and socioeconomic context isn't still very short food supply chain friendly, let's say. There are still a niche market that has to evolve in an environment of rules, infrastructures that are still out of step regarding the characteristics and needs. So what are the main barriers and needs of short food supply chains? The four most important hindering factors highlighted in the results of our questionnaire are the difficulty to compete with conventional big distribution, the lack of supporting regulatory tools, the lack of time of producers to dedicate to sales, and the lack of consumer awareness. We finally summarized the main obstacles in this list. So the lack of definition of short food supply chains, already mentioned by Silvana also, which is a transversal issue, the lack of knowledge and data, the lack of capacity and resources of producers, the limited bargaining power of producers, the unsuitable food health and safety standards, the unsuitable processing infrastructures, the limited access to public procurement, the inefficiency of logistics, the lack of affordability and accessibility, and the lack of consumer awareness and capacity to make informed choice. To each problem corresponds a series of needs that are the need for a legal criteria and categories to differentiate and protect short food supply chains, which is actually a transversal issue, as I said, the need for harmonized data collection at EU level, for improved knowledge and innovation transfer, especially in terms of business models, consumer demand, cooperation modes, etc., for support for new initiatives, for marketing, sales and communication, and for cooperation and networking initiatives, and for increased access to funds. In relation to the bargaining power of producers, there's a need for an increased protection of primary producers and for support of the most empowering cooperation and association modalities. In food health and safety area, there is a need for an increased application of flexibility measures for proportionate and less invasive quality control procedures and support to fulfill health and safety requirements. Need for local processing infrastructure adapted to small productions. In public procurement, a need for increased mandatory green and social criteria, and for strategic territorial food planning involving local producers. In logistics, a need for support of cooperation initiatives and for infrastructures and services. A need of differentiated tax systems that better internalize products' externalities and for sales infrastructure and services, that help producers to directly sell their products. And finally, a need for promotion of short food supply chains and for an increased transparency and consumer empowerment. So as I said in the beginning, the aim of the roadmap is to make this as concrete as possible, putting the recommendations into perspective with existing regulation and strategies, and determining the potentially most suitable policy instruments to implement them. So we identified these key regulations and policies in this non-exhaustive list. So of course, the Farm to Fork strategy, the Food 2030, the Next Generation Recovery Plan, the CAP and the Rural Development Policy, the so-called hygiene package, the Directive on Unfair Trading Practices, the Public Procurement Rules, the Trade Rules, and the Urban Food Policy Pact. And a series of policy instruments that will be recommended for each policy proposition on the basis of the analysis of the current regulatory and political framework, and according to a principle of efficiency, aiming at the practical and simple implementation and avoiding as much as possible burdensome processes. So to illustrate that, a couple of examples. First, the definition issue. As it was presented by the University of Torino, SMARTCHAIN introduces new concepts with respect to the existing legal definitions in a more inclusive and working definition. Concepts such as social proximity, transparency, interconnection between farmers, fair prices for farmers and consumers, and environmental and economical sustainability. The point is that there is a big confusion about the signification and interpretation of the term short. What we propose here is to establish a series of criteria of differentiation in order to distinguish short food supply chains from other types of chains. And also within the short food supply chain category, criteria of categorization to distinguish between the different types of short food supply chains. A criteria of differentiation, as criteria of differentiation, we identified 5 different factors. The geographical distance or locality, which can be quantified in kilometers or transport duration. The social proximity, measured in terms of number of intermediaries. The fairness, which can be quantified with the proportion of consumer price captured by the primary producer. The size, measured in tons of product, for example, and the environmental sustainability, defined with a carbon footprint analysis, for example. Then we can also classify the short food supply chains according to complementary criteria, such as the organizational structure, so individual versus collective initiatives, family farms, and so on. The type of production method, organic versus non-organic, the level of integration of the chain, the type of commercialization channels, virtual, physical, on-farm, off-farm. So the important point is that these criteria should be defined and used in a modular way. According to the policy measure it is aiming to address. This is why we call it a transversal issue. So according to the political goal, the criteria and combination of criteria may vary. Geographical distance can be used to foster local and circular economies, social proximity to empower producers and foster community integration, the volumes of product to differentiate small producers in funding or tenders, or support them through taxing system, for example. Regarding the social proximity, here also, as Silvana said, the definition of intermediary is also a key aspect. More than the number, the issue is rather their role. They can be food hubs, processors, value adders, service providers, cooperatives, retailers, and so on. So Some are indispensable and contribute to the social, economic, or environmental sustainability of short food supply chains, but others don't. So here we have to pay attention to how we define and count value chain actors as intermediaries. The proposal for a legislative framework for sustainable food system foreseen to 2023 within the Farm to Fork strategy could be a good framework to establish all these criteria, for example. And another example, the food health and safety issues and the need of short food supply chains for more flexibility in the requirements and control procedures that were designed for the big agri-food industry and are usually very difficult to fulfill by small producers and direct sellers. So the main recommendations to solve this problem here are to establish guidelines for member states about flexibility measures. We see here the importance of the criteria of definition, and that could be done through communication from the Commission. To provide specific training on flexibility measures to national authorities, to provide specific training and advisory services also to short food supply chains actors to inform them about flexibility measures and conditions, and to financially support them in the fulfillment of health and safety measures through rural development programs, for example. Here, the relevant regulation is composed of the so-called hygiene package and the Commission notice about the implementation of food safety management systems, including the facilitation and flexibility of the implementation in certain food businesses. As far as the training aspect are concerned, as well as the financial support to fulfill food safety and hygiene requirements, they could be carried out through rural development tools, providing guidelines for the design of the national programs and for their evaluation with indicators, for example. So that was it, a quick and quite superficial overview of what will be our roadmap for long-term impact of the project. We are, of course, looking forward to a discussion with the Commission on this topic also. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Louise, for your very impressive presentation. Also excellent results, and also my big thanks to all people who contributed to these findings. And so we are looking forward for our next meeting with the Commission to further discuss the latest results of the project. Are there any comments or questions right now? If it's not the case, I'll make it very short. I think everybody is a bit hungry now. It's lunchtime. I want to thank everybody. And it was a great, morning today. And, it shows all the spirit, all the activities, all the engagement in the project. I'm very happy to work with you. And I'm also happy that we still have some more days for finalizing SMARTCHAIN. So we will stay in touch in the frame of SMARTCHAIN. We are already working on some new projects, new proposals, etc. And it's a pleasure to meet you again and again. So stay healthy and all the best until our next meeting. Bye-bye.